everybody. We are back with another Let's Talk PPCM chat. I am Brianna, the founder of Let's Talk PPCM. And we have Miss Michelle on the line today with us. She is a dietitian nutritionist, and she wants to be able to help educate you all about heart health. Thank you so much, Miss Michelle, for being with us today. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm a registered dietitian that specializes in heart disease management and prevention. So I specialize in all heart conditions and really making sure that we are taking a proactive approach in improving our health through nutrition so that we can live long, healthy lives and recover from a lot of heart diagnosis and conditions that people have received.
Right. Yes. So thank you so much for that. And I know that one thing that you are big on is by making sure that patients are basically receiving the information that they need per their results or their blood results. You know, a lot of times we get, told that, okay, we need to run your blood and then, or even at the ER, and then they kind of send us on home, but we weren't really taught or educated. Can you let us know a little bit about that error?
Yeah, it's important that we are proactive in our health because if we're not, that's when our risk increases. So if you go to the ER, you go to the doctor, and you don't understand kind of what's going on, make sure you ask your questions. Google is sometimes not our friend. A lot of times it puts us down this rabbit hole of really negative information. It can cause a lot of health anxiety. So it's important that you know for you what those numbers should be and what you can do to improve them. So if you go to the ER, the doctor, and they're trying to explain something you don't understand, it's okay for you to ask those questions. You need to be the one taking care of that. And it's okay for you to also ask for a copy of your blood tests so you can compare your previous ones to each other and just understand where do you stand in those categories. Because a lot of times what I see is that people are lost in terms of, well, okay, I got this diagnosis. I don't know what it means. I don't know what I can do. And if we flip the switch and say, you know what, I got this diagnosis, but I can eat better. I can address my blood pressure through food. I can address these numbers through food. We're able to then live a long, healthy life without having to worry about this condition.
Oh my goodness. Yes, that's definitely very important information. Oh my goodness. Because I know I remember just looking at those codes and not knowing exactly what it means. You know, I had to actually teach myself how to go in and research every blood test that they run, just to kind of educate my own self because it's not
Yeah.
automatically done.
Yeah, and you
Yes.
know what? When that happens, though, you should try to find a practitioner who will give you that time to explain it because you need to understand, well, okay, that's high. What can I do about it? Is it improved at my next visit? So if you go to the doctor and it's high, you should then make sure that if it's blood pressure, for instance, testing it at home and making sure that it's coming down to normal levels, not letting it stay high for too long. But if it's a lab test, make sure you go back, in 3, 6 months and recheck it to make sure that it's normal or trending in the right direction. You don't want it to stay high too long because that can cause some silent damage. So when you know it's elevated, we want to be proactive in terms of what we're doing to lower it or optimize those levels. But at the same time, we also want to be proactive to recheck it to make sure that our levels are normalized.
Wow. Okay. And with you saying rechecking it, like letting some time pass to recheck it to see, like, can sometimes it be elevated and then sometimes it decrease, or just like a BNP blood test? Like,
So a lot of times, so it depends the number. If it's elevated, it's not usually necessarily falsely elevated, but if the
mm,
doctor gives you medication or you say, you know what, I'm going to really hone in on my nutrition and making sure that I'm physically active and I'm going to hone in on my stress and you add in a proactive measure, you want to retest it to make sure that it is coming in the right direction. So super important not to ignore an elevated number, but to be proactive in optimizing it.
gotcha. That makes so much sense. Okay, Ms. Michelle. So how can we change, or as newly diagnosed, because with having PPCM, a lot of the times the moms are very young, or sometimes in their teens, and we're told that we have to change our diet. We have to basically switch everything that we was used to to trying to be heart healthy, as they call it. So what's the best way on how we can transition our young selves when, in that state to better have a healthier diet that we probably not used to?
Yeah. So a lot of the traditional, when you look it up, it might not necessarily be things that you like to eat or that's part of the culture. So look at it more in terms of food categories and what you like in those food categories. So for instance, evaluate what you're currently eating and see how you can improve one thing. As a new mom or in your third trimester, there's a lot of things going on, and it's really hard if you have to uphaul your whole entire diet. So really just focus on one thing. Can you add in your favorite vegetable, whether that's broccoli, carrots, collard greens, whatever it might be? It doesn't matter as long as you're making that balanced approach, because those vegetables, each one has its own kind of property, but any vegetable is going to have things like potassium or folate or magnesium or certain nutrients that reduce inflammation. And with PPM, there is a lot of underlying inflammation that needs to be reduced through proper nutrition. So I would start there if you can. And that way you can at least do one thing that's going in the right direction. It'll also make you feel better. And that motivates you to add on another principle. So start slow, but really look at what is one thing I can do today for myself.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so with that, definitely like with the salt intake, I know that that's like another big one, watching your sodium. And a lot of times, do you recommend that we have a nutritionist like after being diagnosed? Or do you just kind of think it's okay to just follow what the hospital tells us and then kind of just go home, or, you know?
So, a lot of times, the unfortunate truth is the hospital tells you everything you shouldn't eat. So then you're kind of left, well, what is there left to eat? And it's very discouraging. So, you can ask in the hospital to speak with the dietitian there if that's helpful to you. So they can help guide you on, well, what are you eating and what can you change to make it more heart healthy and get to your goals? Because the individualized piece allows for more customization of, well, what you're eating and what can we do to make it a little bit more heart healthier. So a dietitian can definitely help, but you need to ask those questions, and you need to ask a lot of the times for a dietitian. If you can see a dietitian outside of the hospital, that's also a great idea in order to just make sure you're getting all of the nutrition. Because while a lot of times the doctor will really encourage no salt, no salt, no salt, or low sodium, yes, that's one piece of the puzzle, but it's not addressing everything else. Because in PPM, what's happening is your heart is having a hard time pumping efficient oxygenated blood throughout the whole body. And if you're not eating certain foods to help optimize your blood vessel health and to reduce the burden on your heart, it's not going to work as effectively. So what you eat matters also versus what you don't eat. So both matter. It's not just don't. It's, well, what are you eating? We need to make sure we're looking at the whole picture. And unfortunately, most hospitals focus on the don't list. And we want to focus really on the do list of what are we doing for ourselves. And that also gives us more prioritization of our health and also a better mindset and an empowered approach. Because you're saying, well, look, I have this, but I'm going to do this for myself. And in the beginning, it might be hard. There might be a lot of fatigue, a lot of just, uncomfortableness and an inability to cook meals or do things like that. So rely on your support system if you can. And if you're relying on outside food, making sure that you're trying to balance it as best as possible.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that explanation. Thank you so much. What would you say to the ladies who like, we're no, some of them be in heart failure, or when we are in heart failure, at that time, and we want that taste of pizza, and it happens a lot. It's like we have to ask each other, is it okay if I eat a pizza or a slice of pizza, or is it okay? What would you say to those young moms?
I think we're really hard on ourselves of saying you have to be perfect in order to get good results. And that's not the case. It's more of the consistency and the majority of time of giving your body what it needs to help balance that. So if you can have if you have a slice of pizza and you enjoy it and then you move on, the next meal is much more balanced, it's really not going to have a very big effect on you. But if you can balance the pizza with vegetables, with a protein, that's going to help make it a little bit more balanced, and your body will be able to, digest it better, but also avoid the retention of too much salt. So choosing wisely, right? Like if you're getting a pizza with pepperoni on it, that's going to be an extra salt on top. So we want to just be mindful. We also want to be mindful of, well, can we pair this with something that has high potassium in it? Like our broccoli or our sweet potato, that's going to help lower the sodium effect from the food, because sodium and potassium work in tandem together. So really important that we're looking at the whole picture and not feeling guilty if it's not perfect, because if we over restrict, then it leads to more binges. So instead of having 1 or 2 slices of pizza that time, you might order a pie and have half the pie because you felt deprived. So it's better to have it in smaller quantities than to say no, 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 no. And then when you're exposed to it, you end up eating too much, because the volume matters in terms of how our body can get rid of the sodium found in higher sodium foods.
Yes, wow. Thank you so much. You just explained so perfectly. Okay, so in this specific diet, like, do you recommend a specific diet, or a specific seasonings or anything like that mom should know about?
Yeah, so my philosophy is I hate kind of pigeonholing people of you have to follow this diet or that diet, because a lot of times we kind of pick and choose within those diets and they're very vague. I focus more on a nutrient sufficient, well-balanced diet that's individualized and customized to your culture and what you like to eat. Because if I told someone follow this diet, but it's not culturally sensitive, it's not going to work out, right? So if you look at and focus on half your plate of the non-starchy vegetables, and that could be whichever ones you like. It could be, and then a quarter of your plate is your lean protein, like your chicken, your fish. If you want plant-based protein, like tofu, beans, and then the other is your starch. So that can be anything from rice to pasta, but it's a half a cup, so it's not overwhelming, but it still gives you satiety. And that's kind of where we look at it. So in different people's preferences and different people's cultures, they like different vegetables, they like different proteins, they like different whole grains, and any of those can really fit, as long as they're not very oily or very fried. We want it more baked or steamed or roasted or even grilled. Those are all fine to help make it more flavorful. And then use your spice cabinet to your liking. Just try to stay away from salt or garlic salt or a lot of seasonings that have salt as the primary ingredient, just because a pinch of salt can really add up and can be a lot of sodium at the end, because 1 teaspoon of salt is 2,300 milligrams of sodium, and that's how much we want in a day. So it can really add up. But use those spices. If you like cayenne, if you like basil, if you like oregano, you like cumin, whatever it might be, keep it flavorful. Definitely add a lot of that, but you don't necessarily need the salt. But my biggest advice is don't cut out the salt and forget to bring something else in. Like whenever a recipe says a teaspoon of salt, you can lower it as much as possible. And then the other portion, put garlic powder in there, put onion powder, make it flavorful so that you enjoy your food and it tastes good. It's not heart healthy food is not bland food. It's flavor with a lot of herbs and spices that you like. Those herbs and spices are also filled with antioxidants and anti-inflammatory herbs, like so great for you. So please enjoy them.
Yes, wow, that is beautiful. Okay, so in this case, should we be taking dietary supplements, or should we follow certain vitamin routine that can possibly help? to get us back into or to increase the heart function, or what it would be helpful in helping to try to increase the heart function the most naturalist way as possible, besides having to lean more on medication?
Yeah, so it's super important that you really are focusing on that nutrient sufficient diet. So trying to get all of those nutrients from your food, because it's the safest way. Your body knows how to absorb it, metabolize it, and make sure that you're utilizing it appropriately. When you pick and choose vitamins, a lot of times it can actually cause more pressure on the liver, the kidneys, and a lot of them are filled with a lot of oils that can actually go rancid and cause more harm in your blood vessels. So I always say food first. But a lot of people who have postpartum cardiomyopathy have iron deficiencies and they're anemic. And in those instances, if you have a known deficiency, that should be individualized, but those supplements may be recommended in order to ensure you're getting those nutrients to help. But the same thing goes with, like I mentioned before, if you have a diagnosis of anemia, you have iron deficiency, you go on a multivitamin, iron supplement, you recheck your blood tests in 3 months and your iron levels are normal, and you've now increased more iron in your food, you might not need an iron supplement. You don't want to have too much iron. That's not good for postpartum cardiomyopathy either. We need the right amount. So you should be testing your blood. I always look at supplements almost like looking at it as it's not going to be a long-term intervention. They're really to help supplement when needed. And so focusing on a more well-balanced diet is going to be more heart healthy than just taking other pills. They can actually interfere with some medications you might be prescribed. And so it's better to focus more on food first.
Yes, I love that. And to piggyback on that, the last thing you stated, a lot of the moms, or sometimes the cardiologist will make a mom stop breastfeeding. Okay, now that's because of certain medications they may be on. Is there a certain way that the mom can continue breastfeeding with having a nutritionist, diet, up on probably lacking a certain medication that the doctor is recommending? Do you think that it's possible for the heart to continue to still become healthier, or, kind of heal while the mom is still breastfeeding?
That's kind of a very individual situation because some of the medication can be taken while you are breastfeeding. So it depends the one that you're on. I'm very big about, if the doctor mentions you need a certain medication, I wouldn't avoid that. I would try to continue that path, but know that it doesn't necessarily need to be a long-term medication. So a lot of times medications get taken off as long as you're routinely going back for checkups and you being proactive. So meaning that you look at those numbers and say, hey, doctor, my numbers have gotten better. My ejection fraction has increased. Like, do I need to be on these medications? Because sometimes they won't change anything unless you advocate for yourself. And so you need to know, you need to be like, hey, I see that I really improved. Is this still needed? But I would say, if your ejection fraction is very low and you're on these supportive medications, they can be life-saving, but they're not necessarily long-term. Your heart can recover, but we want to follow that protocol just to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce your risk. So a lot of times in my practice, people are on many medications, and then we focus on diet, and then we got off a lot of medications. But I never tell you get off medications. I say go back to the doctor, show them how you've improved all these numbers, and see what they have to say, because we don't want your numbers to be too low. There's a reference point. Too high is not good, but too low is not good either. And so if your nutrition is bringing it down and your physical movement's bringing it down and your heart's recovering, you don't need as much of those medications to do that job for you.
Oh my goodness, that is a perfect example. Thank you so much. Okay, so was another question, and like, how can we best avoid excess salt? Do we need to keep track of what we're eating daily? And then, like, sometimes if you're a new mom, it's probably kind of impossible, kind of hard to kind of keep track of exactly everything that we're eating or putting into our bodies. But is there a best way to help ourselves be able to avoid the excess salt?
Yeah. So it's really hard to know how much salt is in our food when either other people are cooking for us or we're eating at a restaurant. So a couple of things to consider. One is I always like focusing on one meal at a time, right? So focus on the meal that you can control the most. Are you making your own breakfast? Is someone helping you make breakfast? What are you having for instance, breakfast? And assess that. Most people we'll go through maybe one or two, three different options for each meal. And so if we hone in on one meal at a time, we can assess how much sodium is in that meal. You really, on a general basis, want to have less than around 350 milligrams per meal. But if you notice when you first calculate it that it's 1,000 milligrams in that meal, if you bring it down even to 800 milligrams, you're going in the right direction. So I would do it one meal at a time. And I would check for like simple things that kind of cause sodium to skyrocket. So if things are in a heavy sauce, the condiments are usually very high in sodium. There are other alternatives that can be low in sodium, but you kind of have to really look for it. So I would go straight for like the condiments, the sauces, the dressings. That is one thing. And if someone's cooking for you, asking them, if they can hold the salt until after they've portioned your piece out and they can put the salt in the other people's food, but you can use a garlic shaker, paprika shaker, cumin shaker instead of the salt if you're used to putting salt on your food. So it takes a little bit of effort. It is but we want to try doing one meal at a time to lessen the burden. And then also focusing on, well, where can you add a vegetable? Because like I mentioned before, sodium constricts the arteries, but potassium opens up the arteries. And so if you focus on adding in those high potassium vegetables, that's going to help negate some of that sodium effect. And the reason why we ask to have a lower sodium diet for postpartum cardiomyopathy is because when you have a high salt diet, your arteries constrict. And when your arteries constrict, your heart has to work harder to pump blood throughout the body. If we can open up your arteries, we lessen the burden on your heart and it's easier for it to recover and do its job as we want it to. So I want you to focus on, well, where can I add in that vegetable to help neutralize the sodium that may be in my food?
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for that breakdown. I have just one more question before we wrap things up. So, how can we best create a dietary approach that fits our life and our culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always say kind of look at what you're currently doing. You can't go from what you're doing and flip it 360. It's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to be a long-term solution. So I like to, write down kind of what you're eating. A lot of times we don't even know. We're so in the the busyness of the day that we don't realize what we're even consuming on a regular basis. So write down what you're eating and then do a fact check. Be like, okay, do I have protein in this meal? Do I have my vegetables in this meal? How can I improve it just one bit with things that I like? Right? You don't need, if you Google heart healthy food, and it doesn't resonate with you because it's a different culture, there is heart healthy food in every single culture. It's more about looking at what are the foods, or write down like all the vegetables you like, all the proteins you like, all of the grains that you like what can you do to kind of marry all of that together? What spices do you like? Do you like spicy food? Do you like, what is that flavor profile you're looking for? We can create that with less salt, but it does take a little bit of planning. And in the beginning, it might be helpful to get additional support from a dietitian or a nutritionist who can come and sit down with you and say, okay, what do you like? And how do we make sure we get all these good foods into your diet based off of what you like? Because if you hate broccoli, then we're not going to put broccoli on your plan, right? If you love, I don't know, I'm just making something up. If you love beets, we can put a lot of that on your plan and that will give you a lot of benefits. So we're looking for how do we make this work for you and that you still enjoy and love your food, because you shouldn't take away the pleasure of eating just because you have this diagnosis. It needs to be looked at as, what do you like? How do we fit all these foods in? And how do we make it so that you can reach your goals and optimize your heart health?
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being with us today. Can you please let everyone know how they can follow you, or even if they do want you as a coach, how can we best connect with you?
Yeah, of course. You can find me on my website at entirelynourished.com. You can find me on Instagram at heart.health.nutritionist. Just be sure to get subscribe to my email list anyway, so that you can get my emails that have all these heart disease prevention tips and recommendations that come to your inbox every week.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miss Michelle, for being here. And thank you all for joining in for our Let's Talk PPCM virtual PPCM chat today. All righty.
Thank you so much.